Most of us has felt it at some point, that sudden evening heaviness, whether that being a Sunday or a Friday. The alarm goes off on Monday and something inside you just resists, and yet you need to show up. We keep going, not because we don't feel it, but because somewhere underneath that exhaustion lies something that's worth staying for. And today, we're going to sit with that tension, honestly, because the conversation about work and well being isn't loving your job every single day, but more about understanding what's actually happening inside of you. Welcome back to another episode of Healthy Mind, Healthy Life, part of the Healthy Mind by Avik Network, where we have honest and grounded conversations about what it really means to live well from the inside out. I'm your host, Sayan, as some of you would already know, and today I'm joined by someone who has spent years sitting with a very real question indeed, one that most of us are afraid to say out loud. My guest today is Tony Tenaglier, a quality manager in the aerospace industry, a PhD candidate in industrial organizational psychology, columnist, a yoga teacher, and the host of the podcast Work Sucks But I Like It, and the author of 2 books as well, exploring discipline, meaning, and modern professional life. So, Tony, I think there's really a lot to unpack there. So, I welcome you to the show. It's an honor to have you here with me, and really glad that you're here, and we could talk about something that's almost inside every one of us, but we rarely talk about. So, it's a pleasure.
Awesome, Sign. Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Thanks, Tony. So, before we get into everything, I want to ask, because you come from the aerospace industry. Before, we really go deeper into how that stress really comes into play. When did you first realize that the way that most people talk about work wasn't just the whole truth? Was there a moment or a season in your life where you think something shifted for you indeed?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I've heard, working now for almost 15 years in the aerospace automotive industry, I've come across people that'll say, oh, same crap, different day, and I can't wait till retirement. And they say these things, right? And, you talked about like the Monday morning, it sucks to get up, right? But what I found is, yes, they say these things, but what they also show where they don't seem to want to talk about is they enjoy their work. And as you pointed out, I love understanding that tension of why as a culture, workplace culture, do we accept that, oh, it's okay to say, same shit, different day. I can't wait to have 5 weeks vacation. It's almost like we're yearning for something like in the distance, can't wait to get to retirement, right? But at the same time, people are struggling or don't have the mediums to talk about how work can be enjoyable. And that's what I really love sort of exploring. And when I realized that with people, I was like, well, wait a minute. I want to talk about the stuff that you do enjoy about work. Yes, there's aspects of work that suck, but let's also incorporate into the conversation the things that you do like about work.
Yeah, that's really important to frame, I think, because you really can't love everything about your work. I think that realization that there will be some parts of it that you wouldn't just naturally like, and to really generalize that to every work that you do, I think that is something that most of us really miss, at least early on in their life. So I think there's also a phrase that floats around a lot right now, that just find your passion, find your flow, and you will never work a day in your life. We have heard that, right? So I think a lot of people have tried to believe that to some degree, right? And then quietly felt that it didn't really showed up the way it should. So in your experience, what's the most common misconception that people really carry about this particular phrase, about work and well-being, that really ends up quietly making things harder for them?
No, absolutely, science. So it's really comes down to, like you said before, it's like this idea of passion is like, let's go get it. And all these self-help books say, if you find a job, you never work a day in your life, which is fine, right? But we're overlooking, to me, self-help today is a little bit too cliche. It's too, let's do 4-hour work weeks and 5 hacks to get happier. And it's like, yes, those are important. There's a time and place for those. But we also have to realize that our work, there's going to be friction points. And the way I like to think of it is that, you have an oyster down at like the bottom of the ocean, right? And it's got a piece of grit that gets inside. And the oyster is like, man, oysters don't have thoughts. But if I was an oyster, I'd be thinking, hey, why is this piece of grit in me? And in the process of like trying to get this thing out, it becomes a pearl. Right. So to me, yes, we are all talking about the pearls that we want. We want to have the dream job and this and that. But I think we got to get back to realizing that the practice, the work that we put in prior to these states of winning the championship, crossing the finish line, getting the report out, getting the promotion, it had to come from a lot of hard work that potentially sucked.
Indeed, that's also important to name. But if I ask you this one single question, Tony, that if you find your passion, you will never work a day in your life. How true do you think that is, and if that is even applicable to what you have seen in the industry?
Yeah, I don't think it's I mean, it's such a I mean, we all love to, like, check things off, right? And I think that's sort of like, to me, it's like, okay, you find your passion, you check it off, and then I can just get to retirement. I don't look at so the difference I kinda see things now is this concept of doing and being, right? We do a lot of different things. We get up in the morning, we fight gravity, right? We brush our teeth, we put the clothes on, we drive to work, or we get on our computer for an entrepreneur, whatever it is. So we do a lot of different things. And, even though people have told me I do a lot of things, I say right back to them, we have 24 hours in a day, 7 days a week. Everybody's doing something, right? So however you want to label that. But what I'm getting at is we have to go from doing to being, right? So yes, we're doing a lot of things, but who are you being in this process, right? So if you really love, your work, yes, there's a time where you're going to say I'm passionate about it. But then I guess the question really becomes, yes, I'm doing this work, but who are you being when you do this work? That's kind of like the direction I'm trying to steer it.
I love it. I think, that really shapes the conversation from what really people idealize versus,
Yes.
what's being more realistic, right? So there's a very fine line of being an optimist versus, someone who is realistic, right? And I think that's an important distinction, Tony, because it really sounds like that clarity can often feel uncomfortable because, I mean, because someone misunderstood it as relief, right? Like you said, so maybe it's like a checklist, right? That you would check off rather and then look at the retirement plan. So I think, and in that process of, reaching to that state, reaching that goal, and whatever hard work comes in between, like you said, I think burnout has become that one buzzword, I would say, in the corporate that we almost use casually now. So I want to understand what's really underneath it. Like when you look at burnout at that deeper level, I think the psychological and behavioral roots are obviously there of an individual, but why does someone even ends up being burned out? And what do you tend to find that there are most people that they really are not paying attention to that?
Yeah, no, I mean, let's face it, we're in a hustle culture, right? We want more. We have this fear of missing out more than ever with social media. I got to have a car. I got to have, this dream job. I got to have a house. I got to have whatever, right? And I guess, like, in terms of burnout, now, just for you listeners and for yourself, Cyan, I've definitely burned out, right? So I've learned myself kind of, where the threshold is with being, I guess, use the word passionate with my work, but also understanding sort of the reality of like, I can't do it all in a day. And I guess how I've looked at burnout more recently is really that, like, I go back to this thing of doing all these things, right? We're doing all these different things. And to me, what I've found when I've burned out is when I have expectations that are very high on all the things that I'm doing, right? So, what do I mean by that? So, right now I'm working, my 9 to 5 job. I'm doing my PhD part time. I'm writing a book. I'm doing all these things. Now, if I had every single day the same intensity on all of these different things, that's how I burned out. What I've learned is you have to kinda, like, prioritize. It's like a dance. I'm not saying give up on
Yeah.
something, and if you're trying to be a parent, I'm not saying don't be a good parent every day, but it's this sort of, like, you know, subjective sort of, like, assessment of your expectations with respect to what you're doing. And that's the individual side. But you have the system side, right? You have corporations that, yeah, you've got the crappy boss, you've got the crappy workplace culture, right? So it definitely takes two to tango with burnout. And I think just one thing I want to say with that in terms of workplace culture, that's where I find that it's very important today for especially, middle managers, that kind of leadership. They have a very important role at the company because they bridge sort of the people down at the floor and then the top management, where sometimes there's a divide that I've seen in manufacturing 100%. And to avoid burnout, for middle managers and for like the people below, if you want. I don't mean below as like a, hierarchical thing. I just mean in terms of people on the floor, is that we need to start appreciating more than just the transactions of business. So business, we're so used to, okay, I've got employee number 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're going to do this widget. They're going to move it to step A, B, and C. We're going to get it to Z and we're going to ship it. We're going to make a profit, hopefully, right? And yes, that is a part of a business. We have to take into account those different steps. But more importantly, for me to help people with burnout is really, okay, everyone's going to be different. We have emotions, we have feelings. People are going to show up not motivated to work some days. Some days they're going to be real and jumping through, waiting to go. And that to me is the responsibility of management today to understand that sort of flow with their employees and on the same time trying to navigate away from burnout.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of nuances in right there, what you said, right? Because we always tend to look at those transactions, definitely important for any business, but oftentimes we don't really find moment to appreciate people. And when I say that, I mean, like having flaws on the people management side. And I think that's more tied into how leadership approaches. And I mean, we often hear how to become a good leader, but I think a more important question is that should you be a leader? Because leadership is not for everybody, right? And that's a different conversation, Tony,
Love that.
for some
I
other.
love that though. I love that.
Yeah, but I mean, speaking of burnout, I think it really put things in perspective. So because people management, indeed, it's it plays a crucial role in how an individual feels when they walk outside of their office, outside. I mean, in their personal lives, right? So I'm curious as to for all the listeners who are listening to this right now, if I were to ask you one last question before we wrap this off, because you do a lot of things. So you talk about work being a context where character, clarity, and fulfillment are developed over time. So I think I really like that framing personally, but for someone who genuinely is listening to this right now and wants to reconnect with meaning in their work, where's the best place that they could actually start? So what would be that atomic piece of advice that you would like to give to someone?
Yeah, no, I mean, it goes back to kind of what you're saying with just like being appreciative of these flaws. And for the listeners out there, I just recommend doing the simple activity. So for the past so many years, I have a young brother that I'm very close with. And we focus a lot on the negative today, right? Everything is, especially with corporations, right? Manufacturing is like, well, we need 5% scrap or less. Well, what about the 95% that was good? We just talk, the language is so negative. So what I recommend when people are frustrated and feeling like, what am I doing? And this is all like going to hell, if you will, take the time, find an accountability partner. So what I do with my brother, I text 3 things at night that I'm grateful for, that went well for me, that was positive, and he does the same. And what I've learned from him, I'll be honest with you, is that for a long time, I was prioritizing my work. And he'd be like, well, I got to spend time with my daughter and my wife. And I'm like, oh man, I'm not like appreciating these things that I should be. So he was teaching me to be like, okay, you got to like balance this work life thing. So really the thing to take away is be appreciative of 3 things every day, because that's going to just start changing the language from that negativity that we find everywhere to more positive. And that's what we really need to be, again, as your podcast is, healthy mind, healthy life.
Absolutely. I love that. And what it really does from a mental vantage point is that it really forces you to find positives in no matter how negative the overall situation is. And that I think changes the whole game, because then you would not blame your situation or circumstances for really pulling you down, because you're training your brain in that very moment to find those positives, like you said, right? Like, and writing is such a thing. I mean, writing it
Yes.
with pen and a paper is so different than writing it on digitally on a notepad. I think that is something that also I would like to add and perhaps advise my listeners. But folks, to all of you who are listening to this right now, if I had to share one key takeaway from this conversation, I think meaning at work isn't something that you will find once and it will just happen like that. Yes. and keep it forever. It's something that you need to return to, adapt, relearn, unlearn, and again and again. And through this process, you will really find a way of how honestly you can really show up at work. So that is what I would ultimately like you to move forth with as we wrap this off. But Tony, for listeners who actually connected with, some part or perhaps resonated with the whole of the conversation and wants to go deeper into your work and your podcast. I love your podcast name, by the way, and your books as well. Where can they find you at?
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. So I guess to me, people have a lot of goals. They have these directions where they want to head. And I'm all for that, right? I love a lot of books. You see the books behind me to get motivated towards these goals. But the thing that I found is most important when you're frustrated and when you're feeling like, disappointed in your work, you have to know where you are. So basically what I've developed on the website worksucksbutilikeit.com/quiz, you can go and take the quiz to figure out where you are right now with respect to the flow channel. Because when you understand where you are, then you can take the next step to get to flowing into the work that you want to do.
Perfect. Perfect. So is that in the website that you shared?
Yeah. Sorry. worksucksbutilikeit.com/quiz.
Okay. Noted. So we'll have that in the show notes, folks, for all of you so that you could directly take the quiz. And Tony, also, what's the best place for them to, have a word, send you a DM? What's the most reachable place for them to reach out to you at?
I'll be honest with you, social media is tough for me. I don't have Facebook. I don't really like Instagram. I don't like being on any of them, to be honest. But if I am on LinkedIn, you can reach out there. I do my best to message you. It's not that I'm ignoring you. It's overwhelming, right? As you know, social media, you can go down these rabbit holes for hours. And I try to be very disciplined with being off it. So in having conversations like this, that these are to me more valuable. Not that a message from you listeners would not be, but just I'd rather be talking in person.
Yeah, that I think really sums it up for today's conversation. To the point, short and concise. So, Tony, thank you so much. Really, I think this has been one of those conversations that we do need to sit more often with, because I think this whole corporate culture right now, I think, yeah, it's changing, but I think it could change faster. And that could really happen when people, and when I say people, both the leaders and people who are in the non-leadership roles, but especially the leaders are aware of what is, we're talking about and bring that kind of awareness into their daily life. So to everyone listening, folks, if something today gave you that moment of recognition, just sit with it. And yeah, this has been Sayan on Healthy Mind, Healthy Life, part of the Healthy Mind by Awake Network. And take care of yourself, and we'll see you in the next one.